How does the structure of O Captain, My Captain reveal the author's theme? In this lesson, you will learn how to interpret the author's theme by analyzing the poem's structure. Let's review. We are reading O Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. This poem is about a ship returning from a journey and discovering that the captain is dead. We know that authors are very careful about what they include in a text. We also know that authors use a variety of structures and patterns in poetry to help emphasize the meaning they wish to convey. Patterns and structures in poetry can include rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and a physical structure, such as a shape. If a poet utilizes one of these structures or patterns, it is on purpose and should be investigated to fully understand what the author intended to reveal. So in this lesson, we are going to interpret the author's theme by analyzing the poem's structure. When we want to interpret the author's theme by analyzing the poem's structure, we can follow these 3 steps. 1. Look for patterns in the poem. 2. Ask, how do these patterns affect my impressions? And 3. Determine the theme. So here's my question. How does the structure of O Captain, My Captain reveal the author's theme? Step 1 in interpreting the theme by analyzing the poem's structure is to look for patterns in the poem. Patterns in poetry can include rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and physical structure. For this practice, let's focus on physical structure patterns. To do this, let's look at the poem. What we are looking at is the physical shape of the poem. To do this best, temporarily ignore the words on the page and focus on what shape the words together make. Sometimes it helps to hold the paper farther out in front of us. There. Now that it's smaller, we can focus on what we notice about the shape. Something I notice is that the first 4 lines of each stanza are a bit longer, and then the last 4 lines are shorter. The second thing I notice is that in each of the stanzas, the last 4 lines gradually fall in or taper in from the left. It's very purposeful. I also notice that if I turn my head, it has almost like a wave shape. You might also see a boat shape with masts. Okay, so the second step is to ask, how do these patterns affect my impressions? Let's look at the text again, along with the notes I took. Now that we have identified that there is this wave-like shape that goes in and out, why would the author do that? Well, let's think about the text. I see in the first stanza that the first 4 lines are the celebration of their return, and then the last 4 lines are when the narrator has the shock of discovering that the captain is dead. That's a pretty big shift in theme, from excitement and exultation to shock and sadness. Since we know the poet wrote the poem exactly as he wanted it, I think it makes sense that the physical structure or shape of the poem helps draw attention to that changing theme, because it really draws my attention to what is happening between the first part and the second part of the stanza. It really helps deepen my impression that there is a dual meaning to this poem, both joy and sorrow. In the second stanza, the first 4 lines are, again, celebratory and triumphant. The last 4 lines are the narrator's sorrowful experience with holding the dead captain. So again, it makes sense that the author is trying to draw our attention to this continual push and pull between joy and sorrow. The meaning is moving back and forth like a wave, so it actually makes sense that the poem itself should reflect that shape. It reiterates that there are 2 feelings as the ship returns. In the third stanza, it's not quite the same. The first 4 lines have both the reflection on the captain's death, but also on the successful return of the ship. The last 4 lines also combine the rejoicing crowd and the mourning of the narrator. There is still a wavering between the 2 themes of excitement and mourning, but it is a little more back and forth in this stanza. A smaller wave, if you will. Since this stanza is really a conclusion and resolution for the poem, it makes sense that the physical pattern should be kept consistent, since the meaning hasn't changed. Regardless, the impression I get as I look at the pattern is that there is an ongoing alternating theme of both joy and sadness throughout this poem. This is further emphasized by the wave shape of the poem. The third step is to determine the theme. So here is our text and the notes I've taken. Looking at our notes and thinking about the stanzas, it's easy to notice that there is a continuing pattern within this poem. First joy, then sorrow, then joy, followed by sorrow, and so on. It's not often the case that we have a dual theme in a text, but for this text, it's become clear. If we were to say the theme of this poem is joy and excitement, we would be incorrect because there are some very painful and sad experiences reflected in it. Likewise, if we were to say that the theme of this poem is sorrow and mourning, we would be incorrect because we would be forgetting all the excitement and celebration within this poem. Because of that, we must say that the theme of this poem is both joy and mourning. So, back to our question. How does the structure of "O Captain, my Captain" reveal the author's theme? The author uses a wave shape throughout this poem that draws attention to the alternating emotions of joy and sorrow in each stanza. Through this shape, the author revealed and emphasized the dual theme of both joy and mourning. So let's review the steps we took to interpret the author's theme by analyzing the poem's structure. 1. Look for patterns in the poem. 2. Ask, how do these patterns affect my impressions? And 3. Determine the theme. In this lesson, you have learned how to interpret the author's theme by analyzing the poem's structure.